podcast.
Hi, I'm Ciara.
Hello, I'm Romy.
And this is...
What could it be but the lead? Oh, it's so different doing this on a remote basis. The world has changed drastically.
Indeed. It's a different world. It's a different place.
Absolutely.
But we're still here.
We are indeed. We are indeed. And this episode is focusing on remote interpreting, all in this whole COVID scenario together. Because it's true, we are all in the same situation, right?
We are. We're all in this together. And today, the two of us will be together, if you like, with our very special guest, who is going to talk about everything to do with working together. Today's very special guest, we should introduce, is Caroline McGrotty, is going to be joining us. And we're so happy to have her here today and have her on the podcast.
Absolutely.
And I'm really, really looking forward to chatting with her.
She's got an incredible background. She's on the board of the Sign Language Interpreting Service. She herself studied in CDS at the same time as Ciara and I. She works as an RTE translator for the weather and the news. I mean, she's incredibly experienced. Not only that, she works with an organisation called AHEAD, and the organisation itself work with people with disabilities, disabled people, so that they can get jobs themselves. And not only that, AHEAD also go to organisations and companies and teach them how they can recruit persons of various disabilities. So really, her background leans very nicely into what we want to discuss here, like how we've all adapted considering the changes that are going on, because it's so different now.
So many skills, so much knowledge. Yeah, and actually recently I saw a quote there. I don't know if you know it or not. I suppose you know the old saying, like, we're all in the same boat, but right. I actually saw a new take on that, and it was, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. So I think that actually really fits in nicely to our topic today, because of course, you know, we're all in the middle of the same pandemic, same COVID-19 pandemic, and you know, the world has completely changed. We've mentioned that so many times before, and we have to adapt to doing things in a totally different way. But at the same time, we all have our own way of dealing with it and our own way of getting through. And then I suppose if you think about an interpreting situation, you know, of course, everybody in that situation is all in it together, but we've all got our own roles, our own responsibilities, if that makes sense. So like the deaf person, the hearing person, the interpreter, we've all got our own roles and our own way to manage those whole situations. So because everything is so new and there's so many new challenges and new ways of doing things, the only really way to get through that is to work together to make sure that we can actually make sure things are as smooth as possible and be able to deal with this new way of working together.
Absolutely. And it's very difficult to work together when we're not all physically in the same space, right? Mm-hmm. It's all online, it's all remote, and that's a very different way of working together. Like in the past, we'd have the opportunity to physically meet someone face to face, but obviously now that's not possible anymore. And it's a very different connection to the individual, right? So before, as an interpreter, you'd go up to a task, chat with a deaf person, have that like little chat. You kind of give them a background as to who you are as an interpreter, and you build that connection. But that's kind of disappeared a little bit now. The computer turns on, you work, and then it turns off. I know you have some tech meetings in advance of that, and you kind of get the opportunity to explain who you are. But that's more with the technical side or the organizers rather than the deaf person, like who often comes to the job and doesn't know who they're going to be with on the day. And it could be very, very difficult. Like if you have a whole list of people on Zoom, often you don't know who your deaf client is either.
Yeah, and especially, I suppose, if you think about the role of an interpreter, the job of an interpreter, it's a very human role, if you like.
Totally.
You know, and it's based on trust and it's based on human connection. And both the hearing and deaf person within an interpreting situation, they have to trust in your skill and your ability to be able to make sure that things are able to take place in a way. So I suppose sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult when that human connection is completely gone. As you said, Zoom, suddenly you pop up on a screen and then the call finishes and then it disappears. So I feel like there's something kind of missing in what we're so used to in an interpreting situation because we don't have that human connection. Right. And as well, it's so important to have those little conversations, have those little opportunities to build rapport with people, because that's how you build trust. But without that, that's gone, how do we replace that in this new new world that we're interpreting in.
I find it really interesting because at the moment there's more time for our like hearing clients. So if you've got a conference, you have that little tech meeting or prep meeting in advance of that where you can kind of advocate for what Irish Sign Language is and kind of build awareness to the hearing client and to people who maybe don't know otherwise, which is very, very good. But as you mentioned, trust with the deaf community is essential. So of course there are those deaf clients you work with frequently, and you'd know each other in and out, and that's great. But what about the deaf community members of the deaf community who don't know us, and then suddenly they're coming onto the screen with these new faces there. Like, how can we combat that? I'll be very interested to see what Caroline says about that in particular, because we need to be able to create that connection with the deaf community somehow. What can I'm sure the interpreters can do more, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited to see what interpreters can do to try and replace that connection that we're talking about, and to make sure that everybody feels, at ease, and that things can carry on as normal as possible. And I think it's also one of the important things, which I actually saw recently, in my experience of remote interpreting, was to be open with your communication. And if you're having any issues, for example, I feel sometimes when it comes to remote interpreting, I suppose maybe you don't have as much access to background information or context, just simply because you're not physically there. So it's so important to actually be open about that. And if for some reason I don't know, or if I'm confused, or I'm missing some kind of piece of information, or my technology is having a meltdown, or, there's something that I need to do and I don't know how to manage it, it's so important to be open about that and actually share those concerns with everyone there. And I feel like that's one of the best ways to actually work together, to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that they're aware if there are any struggles or issues or whatever it is that you're struggling with in that moment, that people are aware of.
Totally. Like I said, you have those meetings when you go into, back pre-COVID, you'd go into a meeting and you'd see the spaces and you'd be able to coordinate with the hearing and deaf client, but now that's very different. I mean, I would love at the moment to know if people understand me or not, particularly going from a 3D language onto a 2D screen, just on a computer. There are sure nuances that are dropped or missed, and I myself am trying to adapt to working on a 2D space with a 3D language, and sometimes I just don't know if it's successful or not, right? So if you have an online conference for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, you're signing away, you finish your computer, you finish your task, you turn off your computer, and it's like, well, I don't know how well that was. You don't have that feedback from the deaf community. You don't have much in that regard. You normally in a meeting would have a deaf person nodding or making eye contact. You're like, okay, I know I'm okay. But at the moment I feel like I'm on my own isolated island signing into a computer, and I really hope people are understanding me.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose we were, if you're going along, you're interpreting away, you're up on the screen, and then next second the meeting or whatever it is, the event finishes and the screen closes, and there's no kind of chit chat. There's nothing afterwards, which we'd be so used to. So I can't imagine actually being a deaf person in that situation, because how must they feel when that total kind of pre and post chit chat is completely gone?
It is so different for everyone. Like you said, it's, the same storm, but everyone's in a different boat. So we all know that COVID's out there, but we're all experiencing it very, very differently.
Exactly. We all have different experiences of it.
That's it. I mean, that's why we had to talk about this episode in particular with the series. We can't talk about this as interpreters and not consider deaf community members and their experiences. And we need much more awareness about how we can adapt in order to give the best service possible to the deaf community. Yeah. I'm sure there's more we could be doing to make that a better experience for everyone.
Yeah. And it's so important to include the deaf perspective in the conversation, because at the end of the day, we all need to work together. We all need to work together and pull through this together, because especially when it comes to the whole remote interpreting situation, that's the only way that we're going to achieve anything.
Like our title says, we're all in this together, right?
Exactly, on brand.
And we mean it. Absolutely mean it.
We do, and I think now is the perfect time to introduce our very special guest today.
I absolutely agree with you. It's a perfect time to introduce and welcome the lovely Caroline McGrotty. I'm so excited.
It's the Leap Podcast.
Okay, so we're so happy to have our wonderful guest here with us.
You're so welcome.
It's good to see you both.
Thank you so much for being here today.
No problem.
We know you're so busy and with a jam-packed schedule.
I'd do anything for you two.
Aw, stop!
Making me blush.
Okay, so maybe to start with, if you want to say a little bit about yourself and your background, over to you.
Yeah, I think Romy mentioned a bit of my background, so don't want to repeat myself too much. But my name is Caroline, and this is my sign name with one hand.
Yeah, I think I always do it wrong.
So really, I come from a deaf family. Both my parents are deaf. I went to a mainstream and a deaf school, and I studied in college with you guys. And as well as that, I've studied other courses like teaching ISL, equality studies, deaf studies, and at the moment I work for an organisation called AHEAD. And really, they're an organisation that supports people with disabilities, and I run 2 projects on that, both for employment. So if people with disabilities want to upskill or advance their careers, that's one program I work on, and then also an internship program. So I do a lot of a disability awareness training with employers in that project. So I've been working there for 8 years now in AHEAD. And at the same time, I also volunteer with SLIS, Sign Language Interpreting Services, also for 8 years as well. Mad to think that they're both for 8 years. And as well, I'm a presenter on RTE, so I translate English into ISL. And that's, nearly 15 years now, quite a long time.
Wow.
Really, that's a quick little summary of me.
That was very, very quick, but I didn't realise you've been in RTE for 15 years. I actually thought that was a more recent venture.
Well, yeah, I suppose before that, I would have been doing a programme called Hands On for RTE. So at that time, I was only about 17 years old and I was a deaf presenter.
Wow.
So up until now, yeah, nearly 15 years overall.
Oh my God, you've got such a wealth of experience.
You've got so much experience, and that's why I think I'm so excited to talk to you about this topic today, because you've got experience, both yourself being in the deaf community and also your experience, of working with interpreters and also organising interpreters and briefing them. So you've got so much experience to do with this topic that we're actually going to be discussing today. So with that said, I'd like to ask you, what do you think remote interpreting all in this together means?
Well, really that question, I suppose there's no quick and easy answer. It's so complex. I think just when kind of COVID hit, it was such a new experience for everyone. Like, what is remote interpreting? Like, interpreters hadn't used that before. Well, some interpreters had experience in that, but for the majority of them, they hadn't any experience remote interpreting. And as well as deaf people hadn't used that type of interpreting before. A lot of companies, organisations, employers, they all weren't familiar with how to use interpreters in that dynamic. So it was such a new thing for everyone. We had to learn new technology platforms like Zoom, WebEx, so many other ones. Like, just all of that kind of encompassed in it all. And at April, kind of March time, when the lockdown hit and everyone was working from home, I think we almost went into like a firefighting mode where we were just making sure everyone's safe and healthy, and kind of accessibility fell behind. So I suppose at the same time, people did kind of forget about accessibility, or if they had an interpreter for a meeting, it was kind of last minute and there was no kind of pre or post discussion with the interpreter, like a briefing or a quick explanation as to an agenda or anything like that, or afterwards having feedback. So that kind of thing definitely was lost in the kind of the start of the lockdown. And I suppose with real life scenarios, you would have had a quick chat with the interpreter beforehand, or you would have seen them in the meeting. So that element is gone too. So I think remote interpreting, it's just so new for everyone, and I think we all have to learn how to adapt and I suppose change our own style. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like it's such a new area for everyone. It's new territory.
It's a new culture, it's a new society. We never thought that this would happen in the world. This is so new for everyone. I mean, people in the past never thought a 2-hour conference would have gone online, and now here we are today in this way. And like you said, interpreters are a bit of a last minute consideration. And interpreters have a lot less work because of that. And I know that CISLI, the Committee of Irish Sign Language Interpreters, did a survey that found out that like 90% of interpreters were without work because of that. And that just proves what you said. The first thing that goes is accessibility. Yeah. And it's something we really need to bring up again. we need to get people's attention back on it, especially that because we have the proof to evidence that.
Yeah, and as well as that, I would say, like, along with those new kind of platforms like Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Google Hangout or Meet, I think along with those, one of them has automatic captioning built in, and in my experience, sometimes people think, oh, that's great, we don't need an interpreter because there's automatic captioning there. But that's not 100% accurate, and it's so different. Like, say for instance, if maybe a speaker was translating or speaking and that was translated into English in the captioning, but how would a deaf person then participate in that conversation? So I think some companies definitely need a lot more awareness around that they think, oh, it's brilliant, we've live captioning, and I kind of have to remind them that no, it's actually language accessibility is what we need. We need ISL, Irish Sign Language. So like explaining to them that, well, what happens if a deaf person wants to interact in that meeting or wants to respond or ask a question, and then they realise, oh, sorry, yeah, no, totally. So I think that side of accessibility, we definitely need to raise way more awareness around that it's so important still to have an interpreter, even if it's remote. Doesn't matter if it's face-to-face or remote interpreting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that technology, it can be brilliant, but I suppose sometimes it can also kind of create a barrier. So now that everything is remote, that whole human connection is now disappeared. So you might think, oh, it's brilliant that we can do things, through technology, but really, I suppose, linking into this topic of everyone in this together, but that human connection, that human link has just disappeared because everything has gone online, and it feels like there's something missing in the whole kind of interaction. It's just such a different experience. And as Romy was mentioned, it is a different culture. And it is a little bit like that. It is like a different kind of culture, this whole change and adaptation to life online. And I know I've definitely had experience of that before.
Yeah, I suppose a big thing I'm noticing that's been quite difficult, I suppose, for remote interpreting. So I myself, I organise events that need interpreters present for those events, but I've also attended meetings where I myself, as a deaf person, am using an interpreter. So for example, when I'd arrive at a building, obviously pre-COVID, I'd arrive at a building and I might see the interpreter and I haven't seen them in a long time, so we'll kind of catch up, and some of them are my good friends, so you might be just catching up on anything, like quick chat before the meeting, and then we go into the meeting and it's very formal, but like on the coffee break we can kind of chat again and how's everything getting on, and that rapport, it has been built up there over the years. Whereas now, for the kind of few meetings that are online, and there might be an interpreter there on the online meeting that I haven't seen in a while, but I don't feel like you can say hello anymore because everyone's watching, and if the interpreter began to sign and say hello, then another person might say, or the person who's kind of facilitating the meeting might say, oh, sorry, is someone trying to speak now? But no, it's just that kind of casual chat, and I think it's because everyone's faces are so visible online. I suppose that that element of human interaction, of that kind of quick chat or the coffee break chat, like that's just completely different online, just because everyone's faces are watching everyone online. So that's definitely missing. I'm really missing that aspect of it. And I suppose, yeah, a few times even after an online meeting, I'd actually text the interpreter directly and on their personal number, and just to kind of say hello rather than actually say it in the meeting. It just doesn't feel appropriate to bring up that kind of casual chat in a meeting. So that aspect's definitely gone. And I do suppose I am really lucky. I have a good rapport with a lot of interpreters. They know me very well. I know them very well. And that relationship was already there in advance. So I can't imagine what it's like for a new deaf person, or even one of the new graduate interpreters, how they're finding building that rapport up online. I suppose, like, the well-known phrase, the water cooler talk, that kind of business jargon.
Conversation, right?
Yeah, like, where's everyone at? They're all chatting at the water station or the water cooler. So that kind of chat, that's really missing online. And that's such a big part, yeah.
And, that water cooler conversation also relates to interpreting, and it's gone, but it's that extra peripheral information that we need. Like, I actually had that experience where I worked with a deaf client, and any political campaigning or a job that they were applying for, a lot of that external information happens at the water cooler talk, and I would actually have to strategize with my deaf client, maybe they'd be with me, maybe they wouldn't, but I would gather that information and bring it back to them in a very different way. And that's how you develop that hearing deaf relationship, interpreter deaf relationship, and that's completely gone now.
Yeah, definitely. And I've even noticed sometimes, I suppose, maybe in a meeting, or even if I'm organising an interpreter for a meeting, if maybe I want to say something in the next part of the meeting, I might just casually or secretly like sign to the interpreter just to let them know what I'm going to say, and it lets them know I'm going to speak next, making sure just that they match my tone, or if there's like a specific word I want to use, I want to make sure that they use that word. So I might sign something like a specific sign, but I want them to use that specific word in English, and that aspect's gone too when working online. So it's really difficult to I suppose, difficult to have those conversations pre-meeting with the interpreter, those kind of little briefings. And I suppose like even when I arrive at a building, like pre-COVID, I would have those kind of casual chats in real life, but online, there's just no opportunity for that to happen.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, do you feel like there's any way to kind of improve that situation, or there's anything that an interpreter can do to try and help with that? Or I suppose, of course, and, face to face, as mentioned, we have that human connection, whereas it's very difficult to kind of try and replace that while you're working remotely. I don't know if you have any kind of ideas or ways that interpreters could do that.
Yeah, I think it's important for any kind of meeting just to have that 5-minute casual chat. And I know it's quite difficult. For example, like there could be maybe 20 people on an online meeting and everyone logs in at the same time and all the kind of videos are just logging in. And I know for hearing people, it's easy to just turn your microphone on and have that quick interaction, whereas a deaf person needs to make sure that their video is seen clearly. So I suppose I wish more people would set up that kind of casual 5-minute chat before the meeting actually starts. And I suppose I'm a bit guilty of it too. Like if there's a meeting on at 3:00, I'll log in exactly at 3. So I definitely should log in maybe at 2:55. I know I should, but I definitely think if it was something on an agenda that at 3:00 until 3:05, it's a casual chat for everyone. So to just make it more relaxed, and definitely to help alleviate that aspect of it for the interpreter and deaf participants. Like I know for myself, when I organise events with an interpreter, and we've had many events over the last 6 months that we've needed interpreters for, I think, especially because I work with a disability organisation, so I make sure that the interpreter has plenty of information ahead of time. They have the presentation or slides, that they know who the deaf participants are, who's the chair, who's responsible for any tech issues, like what colleagues to contact. So I would give all that information ahead of the event, like a little briefing, just explaining what's going to happen, how the meeting is going to work, who my colleagues are, etc. And I suppose that definitely does help, but at the same time, when I'm in a meeting, those things aren't possible, so it's a really difficult one. Yeah, I think.
It's funny, I know I've had some pre-organizational meetings with some clients and not with others, and often what happens in those pre-conference meetings, it ends up being, oh, well, this is what Irish Sign Language is. Maybe they'd ask me, oh, why do you have 2 Irish Sign Language interpreters? And it's like almost like advocacy. Yeah. It's like this kind of small chat, but we have a little time to ask about like interpreter questions or tech questions, but I often find it's a little bit more beneficial for the hearing community because we get the opportunity to explain what our role is, what our job is, but in terms of the other aspect of communicating with the deaf client directly, we don't get that as much anymore, and it's missing.
Yeah, and I can even see sometimes interpreters are almost a bit afraid to sign at the start of an online meeting. Do you know what I mean? Like I can just see it in their face. I can see that kind of look of hesitation or panic, and just even knowing that everyone's watching them, not just the deaf person is watching them, but all eyes are on the interpreter for an online meeting, just because it's so clear and obvious that the interpreter's there. Maybe they have that blue background, or they have their name changed to ISL interpreter, and yeah, a lot of people, all eyes are on them. So I think that's one of the areas maybe that it would benefit, just having that 5-minute chat ahead of the meeting if possible, and I do understand it's not always possible, especially in some larger organisations, like for example at a government department where they might have a consultation with deaf participants or deaf organisations. Like it might not be possible for those situations, but definitely for maybe some of those kind of more smaller business meetings or deaf organisations, it would be more possible there, but you can't force them at the same time. So yeah, it's really difficult.
And I think it's one of those things that will become clearer over time. Like you said at the beginning, it is a culture shift. The world has changed drastically, and we're, as we've said, all in this together. So I think as the culture shifts, hopefully the interpreter job will also shift alongside with it. You know, it'll always be that like something crops up that doesn't work so well that we'll go, we need to learn from that and then create a system that works better. Or we see something that works really, really well and we like go further with it. Because, you know, we're all still learning. We're all still learning to cope in this new world.
That's exactly it. We're all learning at the same time. And I think in a way that's actually the nice part. You know, it's not just the interpreter learning, or say, for example, the deaf person, the hearing person who's involved in the whole situation that are learning. We're all learning together. And we're all in this together. We all have to work together, and that's the only way that we're actually going to be able to get through it.
Yeah, and I think as well as that, for online meetings, like they're new for everyone. And I suppose it's funny just thinking back in my own work scenario, our first online meeting, I remember seeing my whole team on Zoom, pretend there was 10 of us there on Zoom, and like we would normally have a chairperson for every meeting to just chair the meeting. And our first meeting was just chaotic. Like everyone was talking over one another and I was completely lost. So I just sat there and raised my hand and they were like, Caroline, what are you doing? What do you want to raise your hand for? And it's like, I want to speak. Everyone's talking over each other. And online, it's just so hard to kind of catch someone's body language. Do you know what I mean? Like if we were all maybe in real life together in a meeting, you can just notice those elements of when someone wants to speak, they might lean forward, or if maybe a deaf person wants to start to sign, they'll put out their hand to show that they're going to sign now. But online, we just don't have that. There's kind of that huge power struggle of turn taking, like making sure that there's that kind of correct etiquette for turn taking online meetings. So whoever the chair of the meeting is, I think they have a huge responsibility to monitor that situation. And especially for an interpreter being present as well. I think in real life, sometimes interpreters might have to interrupt a meeting or maybe ask for clarification, but online that just isn't possible. So definitely for the person who's chairing that meeting, it's hugely important for them to be so aware that there's interpreters in this meeting, to let everyone know to follow good online etiquette of either raising your hand or wait until your name is called until you speak, or even having just a clear turn-taking list. I suppose it's really important for everyone, not just for the interpreters, but it's definitely way more beneficial for interpreters in the meeting, definitely.
Yeah, and definitely having that, you know, try to pre-plan as much as you can in advance, you know, if just to make sure there are things that actually are able to run smoothly when it comes to it. Do you have any examples or something that's really kind of, I suppose, impacted you or really stuck in your mind when it comes to an example of this?
Yeah, so I think for remote interpreting, I would probably put them in two categories, one for meetings and one for events, because both are very different. And I have experience in organizing events, like for example, webinars or online conference. I'm not sure what the correct sign is there, but an online conference. And also for business meetings. They're both organized so differently. So I think for the events, it really depends on what platform you're going to use. You need to be really careful, making sure that your platform is accessible. If you're using Zoom, especially if you're using the webinar function on Zoom, and the presenter wants to also share their screen and show the interpreter at the same time, it's actually not possible. It only shows one person who's speaking. So we really need to be careful as to what type of platforms or systems we're using for online events. And sometimes people aren't aware of that. And I think it's really up to the interpreters to be aware as to what platforms work well and what don't work well. And like I mentioned, we're still learning, but I think it is really important for interpreters to raise that awareness, making sure that deaf people can access these at these events. And at the same time as well, like with an event, it is really important to make sure that if there is a technical issue, that someone's there in the background, that you know that you can kind of message them and ask to be let back in the meeting so that they can look after all the technical sides of it. And of course, that comes with a pre-consultation for whatever kind of conference or anything that is, along with an agenda. All those preparation materials are really important prior to the event. And then for the meeting side of things, I think it's really important as well just to have a really good chair. Someone that just knows that they're responsible for chairing the meeting, letting people know how turn taking is going to work, if you need to raise your hand, etc.
And in my experience using an interpreter in a meeting and organizing events, I can see that it's a lot harder work. There's a lot more preparation involved than normal. And I suppose just people aren't aware of how to use interpreters online. And I'm sorry to say it's a bit more of an extra workload for you interpreters, but I suppose you're the ones who have that kind of first connection with the organization to let them know. And that even as Romy mentioned there, you might be letting the organizers know what is ISL, why 2 interpreters are needed. It's that kind of extra raising awareness of now turn taking. So I'm sorry it's a heavy load to bear, but I suppose we definitely need to raise more awareness and educate a lot of these organizations, and I'm doing the same too. So but I'm just one woman. Like you said, we're all in this together.
Exactly, we're a team.
Totally. I remember one person, Maya DeWitt, she's a sign language interpreter. So she always talks about the fact that interpreters do have this cross to bear, you know, they do have to advocate. And I think what she mentioned rings true in a lot of ways, because interpreters, it happens a lot that we become fed up, that we're always answering the same questions and giving the same advice. But she did say, and she's right, you have to remember that like in a doctor's profession or in a legal profession, you repeat it 100 million times. But they're always patient throughout because they know that people are asking from a place where they need to know the answer and they want to know more. And I think as interpreters, that's something we have to bear in mind. We're doing the same thing as an interpreter in our profession. We tend to be the first point of contact for the deaf world. And we do have that responsibility to represent the deaf community in a good way. So we need to remember that we are the easier, I mean, I hate that, but we are easier to communicate with than deaf people. So we are that first connection, and we have to remember that. And we must remember to, you know, be professional, explain things as needed, but maintain that contact.
Yeah, and I think even one kind of good phrase that my colleague has, I'm sure it's not her phrase, she probably stole it from somewhere else, but the phrase is, they don't know what they don't know. So the only way they'll know is if we tell them.
Correct. Yeah, my mom always says that.
Yeah, and I think how will they know if we don't tell them? So yeah, it is a heavy cross to carry, but as like you said, it's just kind of raising that awareness there. So I was just wondering, I suppose, how to kind of lessen that load for an interpreter, maybe within the interpreter groups or organizations or various committees, if they were to create a set of guidelines. So for example, at the point of booking an interpreter for a remote setting, that they can automatically attach these guidelines onto that document. Here in Ahead, we've actually created an online meeting etiquette document. So that's just really general rules for everyone. It's not just for having an interpreter present, but it just talks about having a chair for the online meeting. If there's more than 10 people, what's necessary, how to have correct turn taking. If you're using Zoom, making sure you have the correct name under each participant. And that's available on our website. And sometimes maybe when employers or if a person with a disability starts working in an organization, that we can just direct their employer over to our website and they can look at that. So maybe that's an idea for any interpreting organizations or agencies. Might just help lessen the load. Well, it won't really help lessen the load, but it's there, it's easier. It's in kind of clear writing in black and white that you know it's there. Sometimes when you just mention something to someone in passing, they forget about it, but when it's there on our website or attached as a link, it leaves more of a lasting impression.
Absolutely. I think that's an incredible point to make.
I suppose one other good thing, well, I'm still a bit unsure about this myself, but I was in one meeting and I think it was at the start of all the remote interpreting and everything was very new. But I remember going into a meeting and there was a mix of deaf and hearing participants and it was online. And I think there was maybe 12 or 13 people on Zoom. And at the start of the meeting, I kind of realized that whoever was chairing the meeting, they told all the hearing people to turn off their camera and just to leave the camera on for the deaf participants and the interpreters. And when I first logged on to the meeting, it just felt so odd and strange. Like, what? Why are the cameras only on for the deaf people? But I kind of later realized that for an interpreter, they need to be able to recognize kind of who's signing back to them quickly, or if a deaf person wants to make a comment, it's easier for them to kind of catch their faces on screen without having a mix of hearing participants on the screen. So I think even, for example, pretend if like if I wanted to make a comment on the meeting, then the interpreter can see me straight away wanting to make that comment. But for me, as the deaf participant, it was just so strange. Like when a hearing person, when they were talking, I could only tell that they were talking because the interpreter's expressions would change. I couldn't actually see their face. So I think there's two sides to that. Definitely for an interpreter, it's much easier there to recognize and to see the deaf participants. But for me, as a deaf participant on that meeting, it was so strange not seeing everyone's face. So yeah, I don't know, maybe you guys have experience in that or not.
It's a hard one. I normally it would be all cameras off in my experience or all on. It would never be to do with hearing status. But normally I'm in like incredibly big meetings that are online with like 500 plus people, so you don't have anyone, or in really small intimate ones. So in the small intimate ones, you'd have all cameras on because it's more conversational. But it's interesting on both sides. Like as you say, there's two sides to all of it. I love having that feedback from a deaf client, knowing that they're understanding. But with a conference online, that's impossible. Like, I don't know who's watching me 9 times out of 10, and I have to try my best to interpret, but it's very difficult without someone looking back at me, giving me those natural cues. And then if I can see, like as an interpreter, if I can see who's not, if I don't see who's speaking, that throws me as well. If I just hear them as like this voice in the distance, it makes it very, very different. Like, and as you said, body language is crucial. You can feel that, you can see that, but without it, like the conversation is flat. You miss these elements. Like in real world, we used to have people like with pens in their hands dictating, and it had like a lot of nuance associated with it, and that's gone, you know?
Yeah, like match their character.
Yeah, exactly. The face to the voice is completely gone. It just disappears.
Yeah, and I think that for me, that's why I found it so strange. And it did only happen the one time, but it was so strange. Luckily, it hasn't happened since then. But I do understand why it was easier for interpreters so that they could see the deaf participants if they wanted to make a comment in the meeting. But I just never, I suppose it was never thought of from the other perspective that a deaf person might not be able to catch the hearing people's, their faces, like the way or the tone that they're saying something.
Yeah. It's all learning though, all of it.
Okay, so moving on to our final question. Do you have a top tip or a little pearl of wisdom that you'd like to put out into the world and share?
All I can say really is that we are all still learning, and we will all make mistakes. There will be technical issues, and that's okay. It really is. And all we can do really at the moment is to just educate ourselves about what types of platforms there are, what platforms are accessible, Zoom or WebEx or any of those. We need to educate ourselves on that. We need to have a good online meeting experience. Turn taking is so important. And as well, we need to try, if we can, as if possible, give a briefing to the interpreter before and after the meeting. And I understand it's not always possible, but sometimes it can be possible. So for example, with an interpreter last week, they actually just texted me directly for any feedback on their signs, and I thought that was great. And I just like let them know that maybe their lag was a bit long, and that feel free to catch up or to interrupt, and they were really happy with that feedback. So it's great to ask for feedback after the meeting as well. And I'm sure deaf people don't mind if you have their number, and of course there's boundaries there, but definitely we need to try to learn how to adapt to this new situation, and everyone is still learning, and we've a long way to go yet. So I think for the future, to definitely, we want to obviously see improvements and to make changes in how we work. Like for example, like pre-COVID, we all thought conferences have to be in person, and now we're realizing no, they can be online, and we can save money. And I suppose now there's no excuse not to pay for an interpreter if you're saving money on food or menu expenses. I know I'm being a bit cheeky now, but there's a lot of savings to be made in the past few months that we haven't been paying for venues, we haven't been renting places or paying for food expenses. So it's a good excuse maybe now to pay for interpreters for accessibility. Just throwing that one out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Say it to the world.
Exactly. Sounds like a great idea.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Brilliant.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I think as well, that's a very practical tip that you can use in an everyday situation. So
I feel like I can really do with any help I can get at the moment sometimes when it comes to remote interpreting. So that's a great help to me.
And as well, asking for help, that's no problem. Ask deaf people for help, or if they've any advice, or even here in Ahead in our organisation, our website, we have the guidelines there. So feel free to adapt them and send them on to any organisations that book you, just so that they're aware. We're happy for our material to be adapted, and it's there to be used by everyone.
I honestly just want a personal tech team to be with me all the time, because I hate being in charge of my own technology. And like, I've had people like, give me the ISL explanation 100 times any day of the week, but actually managing my own technology, no thanks.
Yeah, I suppose 6 months ago, I didn't even know there was such a thing as Zoom. And now I'm an expert. I know how to spotlight people. I know how to change names. I know how to do everything. So I can put it on my CV. I'm a Zoom expert.
She's got
10 out of
skills.
10. Absolutely professional.
Well, 9 out of 10. 9
Still
out
a
of
high
10.
enough number.
Yeah, we're all
Absolutely.
still learning.
It's so true. So true.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I think that was a lovely end
nice
to
conclusion,
the episode.
yes.
A wonderful conclusion.
Thank you so much again for coming on to the podcast, Caroline.
It's the Leap Podcast.